The morning began with an unusual kind of stillness. It wasn't that the world outside had gone quiet. In fact, if I had paused to notice, I would have heard the familiar sounds that marked each day, the distant hum of early traffic, the crows bickering over breakfast near the fence, and the subtle rustle of the wind nudging the trees. But inside my home, inside my mind, everything felt unusually still. It was the kind of stillness that doesn't shout or whisper, but simply is. Like a silence you don't notice until it's been there for far too long. I shuffled down the hallway, feet bare on the cold wooden floor, the soft cotton of my pajamas brushing against my legs. The hallway clock ticked rhythmically, yet I couldn't remember hearing it the day before. Maybe it always ticked like that and I'd just grown deaf to it. Buried beneath routines and noise and responsibility, the kitchen, bathed in soft morning light, welcomed me like an old friend. The window above the sink was slightly open, letting in the crisp morning air, that delicate balance between summer warmth and autumn's first breath. I stood there for a moment, looking out at the backyard. The garden was overgrown again. The sunflowers I had meant to trim weeks ago now hung their heads like tired sentinels. Life had been busy, as it always is, or maybe I had let it become busy so I wouldn't have to stop and feel too much. I reached for the kettle, my fingers automatically flicking the switch, the metal coolie against my skin. The sound of water heating was strangely comforting, like the soft murmur of someone clearing their throat before telling a story. As I waited, I leaned on the counter, eyes still fixed on the world outside. I saw the swing, swaying gently, though no one was on it, pushed by nothing but the breeze and, perhaps, the ghosts of memories. You see, this house has held so many mornings, some joyful, some quiet, some so chaotic they felt like scenes from a movie. Mornings when my son, barely 4 years old, would dash down the hallway in a superhero cape, insisting he could fly. Mornings when I would trip over scattered Legos, cursing under my breath but smiling at the thought of his growing imagination. Mornings filled with pancakes and spilled milk, with rushed lunches and forgotten homework, with hugs at the door and shouts of "Don't forget your jacket" as he ran to catch the school bus. But those mornings felt like another life now. Now, the house echoed a little more. The silence wasn't just the absence of noise. It was the space left behind when children grow up, when life moves forward whether you're ready or not. My son was older now, nearly an adult in age, and in many ways, in mind, but to me, he was still the boy with jam on his cheeks and endless questions about the stars. He was still the child who clutched my hand tightly when crossing the street, who cried into my shoulder when he'd had a bad dream. How can a mother's memory keep her child so small, even when the world insists they've grown? The kettle clicked off, snapping me out of my thoughts. I poured the hot water into my favorite mug, the one he gave me years ago on Mother's Day, painted unevenly. A child's attempt at writing best mom ever in messy, smeared letters. I had kept it all these years. Not because it was pretty, but because it was his. Because it was filled with a kind of love that didn't need to be perfect to be precious. I sat down at the small kitchen table, the warmth of the mug soothing against my palms. I stared at the steam rising slowly, dancing in the morning light, twisting into shapes that vanished before they could be named. I felt oddly heavy, like something was lingering in the air, unspoken, unnoticed, but present. Maybe it was just my thoughts, maybe it was the quiet, or maybe it was the echo of a shift I didn't yet understand. That was when it happened. The knock. 3 short raps. Not urgent, not hesitant, just firm enough to be heard, just soft enough to make me pause. I blinked, surprised. Who knocks this early? It wasn't that early, really, maybe 8:15 or so, but early enough that it wasn't expected. My heart skipped. A little, not out of fear, just that odd flutter we feel when something disrupts routine. I stood up, set my mug down, and walked slowly toward the door. I didn't rush, maybe because I was still caught in the quiet of the morning, or maybe because I already sensed, deep down, that this wasn't going to be just any interruption. My hands instinctively ran through my hair, still messy from sleep. I glanced down at my pajamas, faded blue, soft from years of washing. Not exactly presentation ready, but I didn't care. Whoever it was, they'd see me as I was. Tired, real, human. The hallway to the front door felt longer than usual, each step echoing louder than it should. The doorknob felt cool in my hand as I turned it, and then I opened the door. The door creaked softly as it swung open, the sound oddly loud in the stillness of the house. Morning light streamed through the doorway, catching the dust motes in the air, turning them into tiny golden sparks that danced between us. And there he was, my son. For a split second, I simply looked at him. He wasn't a little boy anymore. No messy bedhead, no superhero pajamas, no gap-toothed grin. Instead, he stood there in jeans and a gray hoodie, his hands tucked awkwardly in his pockets. His face had changed in that subtle way all faces do, with time still familiar, still beloved, but edged now with shadows of adulthood. The softness of childhood had given way to something sharper. Not hardened, no, not him, but weathered, as if life had started to leave its first fingerprints. And yet, in that moment, I didn't see the man he was becoming. I saw everything he had been. The scraped knees, the birthday candles, the tears after his first heartbreak, the laughter that would erupt at the smallest of things. I saw 1,000 moments rush to the surface. Memories layered so thickly that it was hard to separate past from present. "Hey," he said softly, just one word. Hey, but there was something in it. Something unsure, maybe even vulnerable. I knew that voice. I had heard every version of it. Excited, angry, playful, afraid. This one felt like a question he hadn't yet dared to ask. "Hey," I replied, stepping aside. "Come in." He hesitated only a moment, then walked in, brushing past me with the scent of cool air and something else I couldn't quite place. Maybe hesitation, maybe courage. He looked around as he entered, his eyes scanning the familiar space as though seeing it differently, or maybe remembering it differently. The hallway was still lined with family photos, his chubby baby cheeks, his first school portrait, the awkward teenage grin with braces. He said nothing, but I saw his eyes flicker toward them. We walked to the kitchen without speaking. I picked up my mug, sipped, and gestured to the chair across from mine. He sat slowly, glancing out the window, then back at me. "How long have you been up?" he asked, his voice casual, but tight around the edges. "Not long, just made tea." He nodded, his fingers tapped lightly on the table, a rhythm I didn't recognize. Like he was trying to distract himself from something that was building inside him, or maybe it was a countdown to whatever he had come here to say. I noticed then that he looked tired. Not physically, but emotionally. That deep kind of tired that comes when you've been carrying something heavy for a long time. Something unspoken, unshared. I knew that kind of weight. I had carried it myself at different points in life. As a daughter, as a wife, as a mother. "Are you hungry?" I asked gently. He shook his head. "No, I just, I needed to come by." My heart stirred. It was the kind of statement that always precedes something important or something painful. "That's okay," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You know you're always welcome." He smiled faintly. "Yeah, I know." A silence settled. Between us again, not awkward, just full of things unsaid, and yet to be sped. I waited. Sometimes, mothers learn that waiting is more powerful than pushing. Children, especially when they're no longer children, need space to open up, not pressure. So I let the moment breathe. His eyes met mine then, and in them, I saw it fear. Yes, but also trust. The kind of trust that says, if I tell you this, you'll still love me. And suddenly, I knew, whatever he was about to say, it mattered, deeply, maybe more than anything he'd ever told me before. He opened his mouth slightly, then paused again. "I've been thinking about this for a while," he began, slowly, as if choosing each word with care, and I didn't really know how to bring it up, or even if I should. But this morning, I just knew I had to come. I had to say it. I nodded, offering no interruption, no assumptions. Just space. He looked down at his hands for a long moment. His shoulders tensed, then relaxed. And then he said it. "But before I do, I want you to promise me something." I blinked, surprised. "What is it?" "Just that you'll listen, even if it's hard, even if it's not what you expected." I didn't hesitate. "I promise," I said. "Whatever it is, I'm listening," and I meant it, because that's what mothers do. We listen even when it's hard. We love even when it's not easy. And we wait even when we want to fix everything right away. He took a deep breath. The moment was here. But this, the knock, the quiet, the sunlight, the tea, the sound of his voice, this was still just the morning. Just the beginning. And yet, somehow, I already knew, nothing about today was going to be ordinary. "Let me know when you're ready for part 3, and I'll..." He sat quietly across from me, his shoulders tense, his eyes momentarily fixed on the steam still rising from my tea. I knew that look, not distracted, but anchoring, as if that tiny spiral of vapor was giving him just enough time to arrange his thoughts before releasing them into the world. I didn't speak, I didn't rush him, I simply watched, not just with my eyes, but with that deeper kind of awareness only mothers develop, a full body listening. You feel with your breath, your heartbeat, your skin. You don't just hear what they say, you feel what they mean. Outside, the world was continuing, as usual. A car door slammed somewhere down the street. A neighbor's dog barked half-heartedly. The birds chirped, persistent in their belief that every new day was worth celebrating. But inside our small kitchen, time had paused. The walls had drawn in slightly, leaning toward the center of the room, to where my son sat, working up the courage to pull something real out of the depth of himself. "I've gone over this 100 times, he finally said, almost to himself. "Rehearsed how I'd say it, what words I'd use, how you might react, and every time, I ended up not saying anything at all." I nodded slowly. I knew the feeling. I had lived that feeling in so many roles, especially as a woman, taught to weigh and edit before she spoke, to avoid rocking boats. And here he was now, carrying the same weight, editing himself in silence. "You don't need to rehearse here," I said gently. "You can just say it." He glanced up at me then, his eyes holding a storm. Not a violent one, just that kind of storm that comes after too many cloudy days, where all the rain wants is to fall and be free. He laughed, but there was no joy in it, just nerves. I'm not sure where to start. I offered the softest smile, anywhere, a deep breath, a long pause. Then, his voice came, barely louder than the hum of the refrigerator. I think I've been pretending to be someone I'm not. For a long time, there it was. The first brick, the beginning of the unbuilding. He looked down again, like he wasn't sure how those words had come out, like he wasn't sure if he could stand by them now that they had. I didn't respond immediately. I let the silence do its work. Sometimes, silence is not emptiness, it's permission. It tells the other person, I heard you. Keep going. If you can. He kept going. I've tried to fit into expectations. Yours, Dad, school, friends, society, I guess. Everyone has a mold they want me to fit into, and I've done it, or at least I've tried. But lately, it's been getting harder to keep it up. He glanced at me then, as if bracing himself. You've always said I could tell you anything, he added quietly. I want to believe that's true. It is, I said, my voice unwavering. It always has been. A few years ago, he might have needed me to hug him at this point, to hold his hand, to offer the comfort of touch. But now, in this moment, I sensed he didn't want to be touched. Not because he didn't need comfort, but because he needed space to stand on. His own. So I held back. I offered comfort with my presence, with my attention, with my quiet. His fingers tapped the table again, more rhythmically now. Like each tap was keeping his courage steady. I don't know exactly what I want to do next, but I know it's not what everyone expects me to do. I know I don't want to live someone else's idea of who I should be. I need to figure out who I actually am, not just follow the script. His words settled between us like leaves on water, gently, deliberately, each one touching something deeper in me. I could feel the old version of myself, the younger mother, the one who used to make chore charts and career plans and worry endlessly about the future, wanting to speak, wanting to say, but what? About your degree? What about your job? What about everything we've worked for? But I didn't let her speak. Because that mother, though well-meaning, was afraid. And this moment wasn't about fear, it was about trust. So, I said nothing of expectations. Nothing of should or must, or how will you. Instead, I leaned back, looked at my son, truly looked at him, and said the only words that mattered. Thank you for telling me. He blinked, surprised. That's it. I smiled. That's a lot. You just showed me who you are, or who you're trying to become. That's everything. I'm proud of you. He exhaled then, and I realized he'd been holding his breath. There was more to come. I could feel it. But for now, this was the moment. The first opening. The first real crack in the shell of pretense he'd been carrying for so long. And though I didn't yet know what path he would choose, what truth he was about to fully reveal, or where this conversation would lead, I knew that something beautiful had already begun. He leaned back in the chair, eyes drifting to the window again. I could tell that his heart was racing, even if his posture had begun to relax. There's something fragile and raw about the moments right after someone opens up, like a wound, newly uncovered to air. You wait to see if the one you've trusted with your truth will meet it with love, or with fear. And in that moment, he was still waiting. You look different, I said softly, not breaking the mood, just grounding us again. He chuckled. Different good, or different bad? Different grown, I replied, like you've been carrying something important. His expression sobered, and he nodded slowly. Yeah, I think I have. And it's weird, you know. You can be surrounded by people all the time, family, friends, coworkers, and still feel like no one really sees you. I reached for my mug again, though I didn't drink, just held it. I think a lot of people feel that way, but it's rare to admit it. He looked at me, and there was something childlike in his eyes again, not immature, but open, vulnerable, honest in a way adults often forget how to be. I've always wondered if I was disappointing you, he said. I froze, not because I was shocked, but because his words hit a part of me I didn't know was exposed. I set the mug down carefully, as if sudden movement would shatter everything between us. Why would you think that? I asked, trying to steady my voice. Because I'm not the kind of person people expected me to be. Not ambitious in the traditional way. Not chasing titles or big paychecks. I don't even know if I want a normal life. Sometimes I just want simplicity, space, freedom. I think differently than most of the people around me, and for a while, I thought that meant I was wrong or broken. My throat tightened. I had no idea he'd been holding this inside for so long. How many nights had he gone to bed, doubting himself, thinking he had to shrink to be accepted? I wish you'd told me this sooner, I whispered. He shrugged. I didn't think I could. You always seemed so sure of things. So put together. That made me laugh, gently, sadly. I've never felt sure of anything. I just had to keep going. Mothers don't always have the luxury of showing uncertainty. We have to be the constant. His eyes softened. That must be exhausting. I nodded. Sometimes, yes. But I also chose it. I chose to show up, Even when I was afraid, even when I didn't have the answers. And right now, I'm glad I did because it brought us to this moment. He looked down again, twisting his fingers together. I didn't want to lose your respect, or your love. That's why I waited so long, to be honest. You could never lose my love, I said, firmly. Never. But maybe your pride in me. I stood then, not quickly, not dramatically, just enough to close the space between us. I walked around the table and gently placed my hand on his shoulder. He looked up, and I met his gaze. You're brave, I said. Not because you're doing what's expected, but because you're finally doing what's true. That's the kind of person I've always wanted you to be. He didn't cry, but something in him melted. His shoulders dropped. The tension around his jaw loosened, and he let out a long, shaky breath. For the first time that morning, I saw a kind of peace cross his face. Not complete peace, but the beginning of it. He reached up and placed his hand over mine. Thank you, Mom, I nodded, fighting back my own emotion. You don't need to thank me, just keep being honest. With yourself, with me, that's what matters. He looked around the kitchen then, as if seeing it again for the first time. The walls hadn't changed, the furniture was the same, but the space had shifted, grown warmer, fuller, like the house had taken a deep breath and exhaled a truth it had been holding in for years. I was scared to knock on the door. He admitted. I sat in the car for 10 minutes before I came up. I'm glad you did, I said. Even in your hesitation, you were strong enough to try. We both sat back down. The tea had gone cold, but neither of us cared. The heat in the room came from somewhere else now, not from the kettle, but from something far more enduring. Love, truth, and the willingness to meet each other where we were. There was more to say, I could tell, but for now, this was enough. We had broken the silence. The air between us had cleared. We had found each other again, not as mother and child, but as two people willing to speak the unspoken. The morning, once so ordinary, now felt like something sacred. For a while, we didn't speak, but it wasn't the silence of avoidance, not the heavy kind where things go unsaid. It was the silence of understanding, of presence, like sitting beside a lake and letting the water speak for you. The kind of silence that says, we've reached something real, and we don't have to fill the space with noise. Outside, the light had shifted. It spilled across the floor in long, slanted beams, the way it only does in the morning. I watched it stretch, toward my feet, then toward his. It was like time itself was reaching out, gently linking the past with the present. I found myself thinking back, not to one memory, but to many, like a rapid slideshow flickering behind my eyes. Him at 2 years old, refusing to eat unless I sat beside him. Him at 5, running through the sprinkler in the backyard, shrieking with joy. Him at 13, slamming doors and pushing boundaries. Him last year, trying so hard to act like everything was okay. Had I missed this? Had I been so busy guiding, protecting, and preparing him that I hadn't seen what he was quietly holding inside? A flicker of guilt passed through me. It's the kind that lives in every parent, the endless questions. Did I do enough? Did one listen closely enough? Did I love him in the way he truly needed to be loved, or only in the way I knew how to love? He looked at me, as if sensing the shift in my thoughts. You don't have to feel bad, Mom, he said suddenly. My eyes widened. A little. I didn't say anything. You didn't have to. I know you. I saw it on your face. I smiled faintly. You always were good at reading me. He shrugged. It's a survival skill. We both laughed softly. There was truth in the joke, a quiet acknowledgement that relationships, especially between parents and children, are complicated. Loving someone doesn't mean always getting it right, and being loved doesn't mean always feeling understood. But really, he said, his tone softer again, you did the best you could. I see that now. I didn't always, but I do now. Those words, I see that now, moved through me like a wave. Not because I needed absolution, but because they told me something had shifted inside him. He wasn't just finding his voice. He was also finding grace for me, for himself, for the journey we'd taken together. I appreciate that, I said, and I want you to know, I see you too. Really see you. Not just as who you were, or who I thought you'd be, but as who you are and who you're becoming. He smiled, and this time, it reached his eyes. That means more than you. No, I think I do know, I replied. Another silence followed, but this one was filled with lightness, like the kind you feel after crying and laughing in the same breath. A release. Then he looked around the room again, scanning the walls, the counters, the fridge still covered in old magnets and fading grocery lists. This house feels smaller, he said thoughtfully. Or maybe you've just grown. I said, yeah. He nodded. That's probably it. I looked at him, really looked at him, and marveled at how much had changed in what felt like such a short time. Not just in the world, but in him, in us. He had walked through that door as someone holding a secret. Now he sat in the open, unburdened. He had trusted me with the truth, and in doing so, had created space for something new, not just honesty, but intimacy. And I knew, in the core of my being, that this moment, this quiet morning, in my pajamas, tea forgotten, time paused, would stay with me forever. It wasn't the kind of memory you write in a calendar or frame on a wall. It was the kind that roots itself in your soul. I thought about how many times I'd wished for more time with him when he was busy, distracted, distant, and here we were now, not doing anything extraordinary, just being, and it was enough. More than enough. Finally he stood up, slowly stretching his arms above his head, letting out a deep breath. I should probably head out soon, he said, but without urgency. I nodded. You can stay as long as you want, he smiled. I know, that's the nice part. He walked toward the door, and I followed. Not because I wanted to say goodbye, but because I wanted to savor every last second of this new version of him. Freer, lighter, more whole. At the door, he turned to me again. I don't know what's going to happen next, he said. I just know, I want to stop hiding. You don't have to know everything, I told him. Just keep showing up as yourself. That's more than enough. We hugged then, a real hug. Not rushed, not polite, but full-bodied. The kind of hug that says, no matter what changes, you are mine and I am yours. When we let go, he stepped outside into the light, and just before walking down the path, he turned back with a grin. Next time, he said, I'll give you a heads up before knocking. I laughed, don't you dare. Some things are better unexpected. The door clicked softly shut, and I stood there for a moment, hands still resting on the doorknob, as if keeping it open just a little longer might somehow preserve the magic of what had just happened. The house was quiet again, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet I had woken up to. It wasn't heavy or empty, it was peaceful. I walked slowly back through the hallway, my fingers brushing the wall, pausing briefly on the old family photos. My son's face looked back at me in each one, younger versions of him frozen in time, smiling, laughing, sometimes even pouting. I stared into the eyes of the boy he had been, knowing now that even in those moments of joy, there might have been unspoken questions already forming inside him, seeds of a deeper identity, waiting patiently to grow. Back in the kitchen. The mug of tea sat untouched, the steam long gone, the warmth faded. I didn't mind. It felt like a small offering to the morning, a symbol of everything that had been set aside so something more important could unfold. I sat down again and let myself feel it all, the joy of connection, the ache of realization, the pride, the sorrow, the relief that he had been afraid to tell me who he was becoming, and I had been afraid I hadn't given him enough room to become it. But somehow, despite the fears and the silence and the years of expectations layered between us, we had found each other again, not just mother and son, but person to person, heart to heart. I thought back to earlier, when the knock had come, sharp and unexpected. How ordinary it had seemed at the time. Just another part of a quiet morning in pajamas. But now, looking back, I saw it differently. That knock wasn't a disruption. It was an invitation, an awakening. How many moments like that pass us by? How many knocks do we ignore? Not because we mean to, but because we're too busy, or too tired, or too certain that the day ahead will be like any other. And yet sometimes, everything changes, not with a dramatic announcement, but with a simple knock and a quiet truth. I looked out the window again. The swing in the backyard had stilled. The breeze had softened. The light had shifted, brighter now, higher in the sky. Morning had given way to late morning, and the world outside had moved on. But I had not. Not entirely. Some part of me was still at the threshold of that door, watching my son turn and smile before stepping into the day. I reached for a pen and an old notebook that lived in the kitchen drawer. It was filled with grocery lists, phone numbers, and half-finished thoughts. I flipped to a blank page and wrote one line, quickly, instinctively, before I could overthink it. Still in my pajamas. I opened the door and everything changed. I stared at the sentence. It wasn't profound in its language. It wasn't polished, but it was real, and it captured the essence of what had happened. How the most ordinary circumstances can birth the most extraordinary moments. If we are willing to answer. I closed the notebook gently and placed it back in the drawer. Then I stood, rinsed my mug, and set it beside the sink. Life would go on. There would be more mornings, more knocks, more truths waiting to be told. But today would stay with me. Not because of what I said. Not because of what he said. But because, in one quiet morning, wrapped in pajamas and silence, and love, we had both chosen to listen. And that changed everything.